Welcome back as we continue our deep dive to uncover treasure troves of tips and tricks and techniques to help you revolutionize your music making journey inside of Logic Pro 11. Seriously though, perhaps you're looking for some real world examples, explanations, and honest reviews of the included tools like the new Chroma Glow saturation plugin, or even the stock compressors, EQs, and reverbs inside of Logic Pro. Maybe you're wondering if your M3 MacBook is fast enough to handle mixing a busy song full of dozens of tracks. Well, if that's you, or even partially you, then now you're in the right place, because my promise is that these videos go way beyond what a title or a thumbnail could ever suggest. Let's get started. All right, so here's today's rig, a 15-inch MacBook Air with the M3 processor and 16 gigabytes of RAM. I'm relying on this laptop entirely for not only the mix, but I'm also running my screen recording software, so this should be interesting. And today's song is just the same one that I'm using for all of my Logic 11 videos. It's called Cinnamon Sun. I made it myself, and it's nowhere to be found.
We could relax and forget the things we're supposed to do.
Okay, so I've added my general EQ and compression, and I've also experimented with the new Chroma Glow plugin, and I'll just start by talking about that. So this is my first time experimenting with this plugin, and I used it a lot because since I've limited myself to just the stock plugins in Logic Pro, it has proven to be pretty indispensable if you're going after a classic analog sound in a digital environment. So I have it not only on the audio tracks, but also the buses. So let's zoom in. Let's look at our drums, for example. And I'll solo out the kick drum. And my signal chain is pretty typical. I have a gate plugin first, which is just cleaning up the snare from the kick drum microphone. Then I have a parametric EQ. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Then I have the compressor. Last in the chain, I have the Chroma Glow. The Chroma Glow introduces harmonic distortion that's typical of analog units, and there's different types that you can choose from. The trick is to not overdo it. See, on this kick drum, for example, you know, in solo, driven all the way to 100%, that might sound good, but when you listen to it in context, it's a little overpowering, so you want to dial it back until it just sits right in the mix while all the other instruments are playing. And then I have it on the drum output as well, just adding a little bit of color. You got to be careful with these low cut and high cut filters. They're resonant filters, so it's going to excite and exaggerate the frequencies surrounding whatever frequency you've chosen here in this little selector. So as you can see, I've got the channel EQ on most of my audio channels. So let's look at that. It is a little clunky. You can't really get too specific in terms of frequency. Like I think if I put in something like 309, yeah, it goes to 310. Like it, I mean, that's not that much different, obviously. But you know what I mean? Like if I go to 5060, it goes to 5050. It's weird, like it won't get too super precise for me. I'm gonna solo out my lead vocals. And what is good is that it has a nice analyzer inside of it. If you click on this little arrow right here, and then you can change the analyzer decay all the way down to 0, it will give you a picture of what's happening in your audio.
Soon.
So for instance, in this lead vocal,
Let go of the strings that shut us in if we wanted to.
it's telling me that there's a lot of information that I don't need in my low range and my lower mid range, contributing to a boxy sound.
We could relax and forget the things we're supposed to do.
What I don't like is that it disappears after a second. This HQ button right here, this is just the oversampling button, and this really affects the higher end of the spectrum. So if I have a boost up here, for example, you see how when I hit this HQ button, the curve slightly changes. This is important because if this were a bell curve, let's get a bell curve going. If I get a bell curve at 10K and I'm not oversampling it, you can see that it's not symmetrical. If I hit the HQ button, you can see that it turns into a symmetric bell curve. This is important for something called cramping, and I'm not going to get into what that means right now, but let's just say that you want symmetrical bell curves, especially higher up in the EQ spectrum. It just provides a smoother, more natural sound. Just a heads up, if you're taking away anything useful from this video, then the best thing that you could do to help me out would be to like, comment, and subscribe. It is more difficult now than it has ever been to get a YouTube channel going, so all that stuff helps me out a lot. Thank you very much, and let's get back to the video. This is another plugin that needs to be updated. The de-esser inside of Logic Pro is like just bare bones, like barely does the job. It's just kind of grainy digital de-essing. But I'd rather have it than not have it. In the end, I actually chose to de-ess the entire group because when you're stacking up vocals, in this case I have a double and then I have an octave below singing the same thing, and they're all saying S's, they're all doing it. Just de-essing the entire group yielded me a smoother result. And then you can even get in there and lower those S's manually with automation, which as you can see I've done here. Especially one as simple as the one in Logic. All the de-essing in the world is never going to solve all of the problems. Sometimes you just got to get in there and tame those S's manually. Luckily, you can see them pretty easily in the audio file itself. So see, when it gets all jagged here, that is clearly an S.
We could relax in a story and gaze into a cinnamon sun.
Then Logic has its own version of analog emulations for EQs. This is a Pultec emulation, this is a Neve emulation, and this is an API emulation. They do a decent job. They have the curves in the EQ that you would expect them to. However, I would love to see these plugins updated with the technology that they've employed when designing Chroma Glow. You know, for instance, this model of the Pultec, it has its own distortion characteristics that I think could be greatly improved with this new tech. The same goes for the Neve and the API. The compressors, again, I think these could be greatly improved with the newer tech. Basically what you have here is you have the Focusrite VCA, you have an 1176, you have a DBX 160, you have, like I said, the SSL, you have an older 1176, and then you have an LA2A. And to get these to behave in a way that would be typical of their designs, you really have to get finicky with the attack and release characteristics. And I just feel like their newer technology handles transients a lot better than what was implemented in these older designs. And I've started to work on my mix bus as well, my stereo out. I've got a Chroma Glow here and a bus compressor. And then I tried out the linear phase EQ inside of Logic. I usually don't use linear phase EQs on the bus. I have other plugins for that. But since the objective is to use stock plugins, I figured I would try this one out on the general stereo out. I'm going to be turning it on and off throughout my mixing process, and the goal is to use it as little as possible. I am toying with the idea of using a resonant frequency in the lower EQ spectrum on my mix bus, because that's actually adding some oomph to the overall mix. Another thing that's very typical is to use a VCA style compressor on your mix bus, and I'm just going to be knocking back about 3 decibels. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this, and we'll be keeping an eye on our CPU meter. So stay tuned, and I'll be back in a few hours, which for you will be 1 second. Okay, I've added all of my effects channels and I've completed everything else. The mix is finished. All right, I'm gonna play this back.
shut us in if we wanted to. We could relax in a story and gaze into a cinnamon sun. Stories are one. Shut us into a slow decay. We could relax in a story and gaze into a cinnamon sun, or find something new. True, true, you're not a kid anymore. It's true, true, you don't think you have a clue. True, true, you're not a kid anymore. But soon we could relax if we wanted to. Not a kid anymore, but soon we could relax if we wanted to.
So I'm actually very impressed with the performance of this Air with just 16 gigs of RAM. The plugins inside of Logic are coded in a way that they're perfectly married to the system. They take full advantage of all of the processing threads. So if I were to load this session up with this many third-party plugins, I can guarantee you that this system would not even play the song back. That's the great part about working with stock plugins. They're coded pretty much perfectly for the system. Sacrifices that I did have to make, I would say, really come out in the mix bus. Like I said earlier, the compressor inside of Logic, I feel it needs an update. And it just doesn't have that smack, it doesn't have the transient definition that I've come to expect from some of the better plugin emulations. And also the EQ, I just ended up leaving it as minimal as I could. The audio files that I'm dealing with are a little bit darker in nature, so I did have to kind of pump up the high end, and I didn't want to overdo it on the individual channels. So it can be a good idea to get your mix shining a little bit more with some boost on just the overall stereo mix. However, overall, I think I've arrived at a place where I'm happy with it. So the other standout plugin in Logic is Space Designer, and that's their convolution reverb. You know, convolution reverbs are just basically snapshots of actual physical spaces or equipment, and they sound very good. There are plugins that do dynamic convolution, which sound a little bit more convincing, meaning that they use multiple snapshots recorded at different levels of the same environment. But as far as included plugins go, this one is really nice to have. It comes with a large variety of different spaces. I pretty much always prefer this over the Chroma Verb plugin, which is Logic's algorithmic reverb, which I just don't really like that much. I find that it shrinks the stereo image, and I used that on the drum room. I used it on the snare reverb. And I used it on the main vocal reverb.
We relax and forget the things we're supposed to do. We could relax in a story and gaze into a cinnamon sun.
It's a very nice sound. I did just have a quarter note and half note delay set up. That's very easy to do with their tape delay plugin. You can just sync it to the quarter note or half note of your song. And then I just sent various different instruments to that. A lot of guitars. And what's cool about this is that you can modulate the signal a little bit to make it like otherworldly, a little strange. So as you can see, the performance meter is reading at 50% right now. That tells a lot of the story. However, I did have to freeze some tracks along the way during this mixing process because I was getting CPU spikes, meaning that it would just like quickly go up to 100% and halt the project up. Just in case you're unaware, if you want to freeze a track, meaning take it offline and remove it from the processes going on, basically you render it in the background. If you want to do that, you would right click when the track is selected. You go to track header components and make sure that freeze is selected. And then it looks like that little snowflake icon there. You know, and then you just click it, hit the space bar, and it'll go through the process of freezing the track. So I did have to do that for a number of the tracks. However, right now I have nothing frozen and it's playing back fine. So it might just be something strange that was accumulating in the background. Now, if I go to my activity monitor, you can see that I'm pretty much using all of the RAM available to me in the whole system. So it's safe to say that if I were using some sample libraries, like from Contact, Superior Drummer or something, then this might tell a different story. I would run out of RAM very fast. So just keep that in mind. If you're using a lot of virtual instruments, then those are going to be more RAM intensive as opposed to CPU intensive. Like these plugins mostly rely on CPU power, whereas virtual instruments load themselves into your RAM. So that's why you would want to get a computer with a ton of RAM. But in terms of the mix that we have here today, I'm actually very impressed with the performance. So lastly, I just want to touch on why I constantly have a metering plugin at the top right here. This is on my mix channel. So on my mix channel, like I said earlier, I have my chroma glow, then I have my compressor, and I have this linear phase EQ. Before all of that, I have this meter plugin, and basically, make a long story short, I want to see my peaks around like -6 to -3. I want to have some headroom going into the stereo out, and I want to see my RMS around -20, -18, somewhere around there. And if you're mixing along and you're finding that you're pushing too much volume into the stereo bus, then you could either adjust the volume of all of the tracks, which is no fun, or you could route all of the outputs to something called a trim bus. And this is just a volume trim that goes into your main stereo bus. And then you could just adjust the volume going into it with the fader. In this case, I did not have to do that.
Slow decay.
So the last thing that we're going to look at really quick, I'm just going to see what the Logic mastering plugin will do. This video is not about mastering. It's not about loudness. I just want to check my mix and see what EQ decisions Logic's mastering processor would make. So I'll double click on that and it's going to run through the song in the background. Okay, this is kind of what I expected. See, I have the choir vocals take up a lot of mid-range, but that's what I want. I want them to be upfront. I want them to be present and take over the mix at points. So I could see why Logic's AI believes that my mix is too mid-range heavy. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a new project, and I'm actually going to drop in one of the reference tracks that I used to check this mix against. It's actually a really famous Moody Blues song. I'm going to run Logic's mastering assistant on that. So let's start a new track. Just going to drop it in, and let's see what happens. That's actually very similar. When I go back and edit this video, I'll try to put in a screenshot of what the mastering assistant did to my mix and what it's done to this Moody Blues song, which was a huge hit. It came out before I was born, but millions of people had no problem listening to that song. It basically did a very similar thing. And this song was also very like choir vocal heavy. So yeah, take what the mastering assistant does as a suggestion and then ask yourself, what sound are you going for? One thing that is cool about this mastering assistant is the correlation analyzer. So, you know, you want to see things in the +1 area. And if it gets in the -1 area, then your mix is going to fall apart on, you know, a mono speaker or even your iPhone or something. Anyways, I really hope that you've taken away something of value from this video, and if you have, then you know what to do. Also, if you're looking for a producer for your own music, then that is something that I would love to help you with. So don't hesitate to reach out through comoproductions.com. This playlist, based around Logic Pro 11, will evolve over time, so stay tuned. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.